My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm the granddaughter of Edwin Charles Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Holdings. And last Tuesday, I watched my father burn a $38 million check with my name on it. I didn't say a word, I just smiled, because I already knew something no one else in that room did. But before I tell you what that was, let me take you back to the moment it happened, to the day my family made it very clear I was never meant to belong. The room where the will was being read was cold, too big, and too clean. I sat alone at one end of a long oak table, while my father Graham Whitmore and my sister Lydia sat at the other shoulder to shoulder like generals. Neither of them looked at me. Not even once. Miriam Hollis, our family attorney, stood at the front with the document in her hands. She'd been with the Whitmores since before I was born. Loyal, calculated, always precise. She cleared her throat. My name is Edwin Charles Whitmore, and this is my final will and testament. I folded my hands, kept my face still. Edwin was more than a grandfather. He was the only one in that family who ever truly saw me. After my mother died, it was Grandpa Edwin who taught me how to tie a tie, change a tire, and keep my promises. He was the reason I joined the military, the reason I came home. But coming home hadn't meant coming back to the family. Somewhere along the way, my father had decided I didn't belong. Miriam continued reading. Donations to charities, scholarships in his name, a boat to his best friend. Then, to my granddaughter, Claire, Ann Whitmore, I leave the entirety of my unrestricted holdings portfolio. Estimated value, $38,644,200. The air shifted. Lydia's nails tapped against the glass table. My father reached into his jacket and slowly pulled out a check. He didn't look at me as he placed it on the table in front of me. I didn't move. He reached again this time, pulling out a silver lighter. The flame hissed softly as it touched the edge of the paper. I watched my inheritance curl blister and vanish into smoke. No one said anything. Lydia glanced at me, waiting for tears, for rage, for a reaction. But I just smiled, because what my father didn't know was that the check was never the real gift. Before Grandpa Edwin passed, he gave me something else, something private, sealed. He said if they ever try to erase you, just wait, and then open this. That envelope was still in my bag, still sealed, but I had a feeling that what was inside was going to change everything. I didn't come from a broken family. I came from a family that looked perfect on paper. The Whitmores had been old money for generations, but Grandpa Edwin made us new money too. He turned inheritance into empire, real estate, aerospace investments, and a private security firm with government contracts that no one ever mentioned by name. At galas and fundraisers, we smiled like a dynasty. But inside those polished mansions, everything was conditional. My mother, Evelyn, had been the exception. A public school teacher who married up and never let the money change her. She died when I was 10. And after that, things got quiet. At least on the surface. My father Graham remarried fast. Lydia's mother Lynette moved in before the flowers on my mother's grave had even faded. She brought her daughter with her, and suddenly I wasn't just grieving. I was outnumbered. Lydia was everything I wasn't. Pretty in that effortless catalog-perfect way. Charming, obedient, born to smile and marry rich. Me, I was too blunt, too tall, too serious, and worst of all, too much like my grandfather. He saw it first. When I was 15, he brought me to his office downtown and asked, "What do you want to build, Claire?" Not who did I want to marry, not what color dress I'd wear to debutante, but what I wanted to build. I told him I want to serve. I want to be the one who protects the ones who don't have a voice. He didn't laugh. He nodded. And then he gave me a map of all the Whitmore satellite sites around the country. "You'll need to know where everything lives," he said. My father, however, was not impressed. He told me no daughter of his would wear boots and salute flags. So I enlisted at 18, not to prove anything, just because I had to breathe again. For 8 years, I served overseas in a communications and intel unit. No one came to visit, no care packages, no phone calls. When I came home, it was because of an injury. I still had both legs, both hands, but I'd lost something no MRI could scan. I showed up at the family estate in Charlottesville, thinking maybe, just maybe, the door might still be open. It wasn't. A security guard I'd known since childhood told me my name had been removed from the estate access list. Lydia got out of a black SUV, designer glasses on, smile polite, but empty. "You should have called," she said. "We're rebalancing the brand right now." The brand. That's what family meant to them. I didn't even get a room. I was handed a prepaid hotel card. No return address. I didn't stay long. I moved into a tiny rental an hour away. Took a part-time job reviewing cybersecurity protocols for a third-party contractor. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Grandpa Edwin was the only one who called. Every Sunday, 6 p.m. sharp. We didn't talk about the others. He asked what I was reading, what I was learning, what I was planning. Sometimes I think he knew what was coming long before I did. One Sunday he said, "Legacy isn't just money, Claire. It's protection. And sometimes the ones you protect turn on you first." A month later, he passed away. I wasn't told directly. I saw it on a press release. Edwin Charles Whitmore, industrial titan and visionary philanthropist, dies at 82. No one called me, no funeral invitation, no condolence message. I showed up anyway. Sat in the very back of the church, behind the cameras, behind the donors. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. At the end of the service, Miriam Hollis handed me an envelope. "This is from him," she said. "He said you'd know when to open it." I didn't open it. Not yet. But I carried it with me. Everywhere. Because even though the family had erased me, Grandpa hadn't, and I had a feeling he'd left more than memories behind. I waited 2 days after the will reading to open the envelope. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be ready. Grief does strange things to the mind, especially when it's mixed with betrayal. And that's exactly what it felt like, watching my father burn a check worth $38 million. He didn't even blink, as if destroying what my grandfather left me was just business, as if I wasn't even real. But Edwin had seen it coming. He always did. So that night I locked my apartment door, made tea, the way he taught me, black, no sugar, and placed the envelope on my kitchen table. The seal was still intact. Thick wax, deep red, stamped with the Whitmore crest, the kind we used for internal legal correspondence. Inside, I found 2 things: a handwritten letter and a small security key fob. The letter was dated 6 months before he passed. It read, "Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone and they've shown their teeth. What I left you at the will reading was never the real gift. That was the show. The real inheritance lies where I always told you to look beneath the surface. Enclosed is a key. It will only work once and only for you. Take it to the Winterfield vault. Ask for room 73 under my legacy directive. They'll know. Keep your head down. Trust no one, especially not your father. When it's time, you'll know what to do. You've always had more in you than any of them dared to imagine. Love, Edwin." I stared at the page for a long time. It felt like a riddle, but I knew every word was intentional. The Winterfield Vault was a private financial facility in Richmond, used by ultra-wealthy clients to store assets no one wanted on a digital ledger. I'd been there once as a teenager when Edwin took me to deposit an original copy of a 1913 land grant. He'd said, "Money isn't the real power. Paper is." I drove there the next morning, wore a baseball cap and plain clothes. No one stopped me. No one recognized me. At the front desk, I handed over the envelope and said room 73, legacy directive, for Edwin Whitmore. The woman behind the counter didn't flinch. She scanned the fob, checked a database behind a privacy screen, and nodded. "Right this way, Ms. Whitmore." The room was small, temperature controlled, no cameras, 1 chair, 1 screen, 1 safe. Inside the safe was a sleek black hard case with my name engraved. It contained a USB device, a second envelope, a handwritten ledger, and a sealed authentication folder. I plugged the USB into the terminal. It required biometric scan, iris, and fingerprint. Once validated, the screen came alive. A video. Pre-recorded. Edwin again. "Claire, if you're watching this, then the others did what I feared. They've tried to erase you. And now it's your turn. What I've built isn't just a company, it's a shield. Over the years, I moved assets into a protective structure, one they know nothing about. It's not registered in any commercial bank. It exists outside the system, and it's meant for you. He leaned forward. You remember when I told you about the old economic accords, the ones nobody believed they were real? Some were never ratified, but they were signed quietly by the few who understood what was coming. I didn't believe in Nisara or Gesara as conspiracy theories, but I believed in protection. So I created my own system, Whitmore Private Reserve. It mirrors those frameworks. Hard assets, gold bonds, legacy equities, all bundled in offshore trusts, firewalled and hidden under redundant shells. You hold the only biometric key. I sat there stunned. This wasn't just inheritance, this was sovereignty. Edwin had built his own economic shelter, and I was now its gatekeeper. Your father only understands control through destruction. Let him burn the check. He doesn't know that the real treasure can't be torched. The second envelope contains operational instructions. Use them carefully. When the time is right, you'll know where to redirect the power. The video ended. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just breathed. And for the first time in years, I felt something settle in my chest. Something like gravity, like purpose, like inheritance that actually mattered. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. And my time was coming. I took the second envelope home, didn't open it right away. I laid it on my kitchen table, same spot where I'd opened the first. I needed silence, no distractions, no music, no news. The city outside my window was moving as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. Inside the second envelope was a thin leather booklet titled Legacy Directive WPR Protocol. WPR. Whitmore Private Reserve. The pages were hand-numbered, no printing. Just old-fashioned pen and ink precision. There were diagrams, flowcharts, authorization ladders, and a complex set of access conditions. The language read like a blend of international banking law, underground encryption systems, and good old-fashioned paranoia. It was brilliant. Edwin had designed a system that mirrored the concept of Nisara Gesara, but without waiting for a government to implement it. He had done it on his own. The Whitmore Reserve operated as a privately structured asset protection network firewalled against governmental interference, corporate seizure, and family sabotage. The assets weren't in banks. They were stored as bearer bonds, gold bullion patents, and hard property titles locked under a series of offshore legal entities. Each entity was linked through physical keys and biometric ID. And the central control point, the brain of it all, was the device I now held. I wasn't just the beneficiary. I was the controller. The booklet outlined 4 primary objectives of the Whitmore Reserve: protection of economic autonomy, redirection of private wealth toward sustainable legacy initiatives, concealed power transfer through generational shielding, emergency override against internal betrayal. That last one stopped me. Emergency override. I turned the page. It detailed what Edwin had feared, that members of his own family, especially Graham, would eventually try to discredit or dismantle the structure he'd spent 30 years building. In the event of betrayal, erasure, or criminal manipulation, full control would revert to the one descendant he had deemed aligned with the original values of the Whitmore name. And it was me. Every action I took over the next 48 hours had been accounted for, pre-written in protocol. I was to initiate biometric reauthentication, transfer the physical documents to 2 neutral vaults in 2 different states, notify a legal liaison in London with a preset phrase, Protocol Sapphire Rising, and finally redirect the reserve's trust output to what Edwin called a new axis of legacy. There were 3 choices given for that redirection. 1. Return the assets to the public trust, essentially donating the empire back to society. 2. Integrate the reserve into the future development of autonomous humanitarian ventures. 3. Freeze the system permanently, rendering it inaccessible to anyone, including me. Edwin had trusted me not just to hold the power, but to decide what to do with it. I stared at those options for a long time. Then I picked up the device. The next step would require confirmation from an external validator. a retired legal strategist named Miriam Hollis. I drove to her office the next day. I didn't call first, just showed up. She looked surprised to see me, but not confused. "You opened it," she said, like it wasn't even a question. I nodded, laid it out just like he said. "It's more than I thought." Miriam led me into a private conference room away from the junior staff. She took out her own binder, thick or worn, full of tabs. "I've known about the reserve for 15 years, she said. "Edwin kept the legal redundancies with me. If you'd failed the biometric check, everything would have collapsed back into the shell companies." I handed her the phrase, "Protocol Sapphire Rising." She blinked once, then turned to her binder and pulled out a slim envelope. Inside was a laminated card with 2 codes and a set of secondary coordinates. "This finalizes the reversion," she said. "You now hold control over every shadow entity linked to the Whitmore Reserve." You understand what that means, I did. It meant my father Graham had no idea the structure he thought he was burning had a hidden twin. He had torched a visible fortune, but I held the silent one. And it wasn't just bigger, it was untouchable. I left Miriam's office with the card, the coordinates, and a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. All my life I'd been called difficult, stubborn, inconvenient. But maybe that was exactly why Edwin chose me. Because sometimes being difficult is just another word for being impossible to corrupt. And that's what this was now. A quiet war. And I had just claimed the strongest weapon in the room, power no one could see but everyone would feel. The first real consequence of holding power in silence is that no one expects you to survive. And in my case, they hadn't just expected me to disappear, they made it happen. The first clue was a small routine task. I tried to transfer funds from my personal bank account. It was a Tuesday morning, nothing unusual. I logged in, clicked transfer, and received an error. Account frozen. Identity not verified. I assumed it was a technical glitch. I called customer support. The man on the other end hesitated after I gave my name. "Ma'am, can you confirm your social security number again?" I did. Silence. "Then I'm sorry, but this name and SSN combination does not appear in our system." My chest tightened. "Excuse me," I said. I don't know how to explain this, but the name Claire Ann Whitmore is not linked to an active account. In fact," he stopped himself. "In fact what?" He lowered his voice. "The SSN you gave me is currently registered as deceased." I hung up. I didn't slam the phone. I didn't curse. I just sat in my chair and stared out the window, trying to remember the last time I had felt real. I tried my health insurance portal next. Same result. Then the DMV website. Same result. License invalid. Name not found. Even my VA military file, the one that had followed me through 8 years of service, was inaccessible. That one hurt more than all the others. It felt like they'd burned not just my money, but my history. By noon, I was no longer a legal citizen. And I knew exactly who was behind it. Graham Whitmore. He didn't need to threaten me or confront me or even acknowledge my existence. He simply made me vanish. With money connections and legal compliance, erasing someone wasn't science fiction. It was bureaucracy. He had filed a private death declaration under corporate emergency status, a loophole reserved for foreign conflict casualties. He claimed I had died years ago during overseas deployment. And because of my unprocessed medical discharge, the records weren't clear enough to stop it. He had erased me without needing a body. It wasn't just malicious, it was precise. If I hadn't opened the envelope, if I hadn't had the biometric key, if Edwin hadn't trusted me with something bigger than a bank balance, I would have been completely erased. The next day, I went to the Social Security office in person. I brought every piece of documentation I had: old military badges, photos, birth certificates, school records. The clerk was polite, but overwhelmed. "This happens very rarely," she said. "You were declared deceased in a private filing and flagged as non-revivable due to jurisdictional exceptions." "What does that mean?" I asked. She blinked. "It means technically you can't be reinstated unless someone admits they made a mistake, or you sue the federal government for identity restoration. Even if I have proof." She gave me a look of tired sympathy. "Sometimes proof isn't enough." I walked out feeling like a ghost in broad daylight. I couldn't open a bank account, couldn't sign a lease, couldn't vote, couldn't even get a library card. But what they didn't know was this: you don't need to exist on paper to move real power. And thanks to Edwin, I had more than a paper trail. I had the key to a structure built entirely off the grid. Still, I needed help. So I called the one person left who had access to both legal and ethical gray zones: Harper Quinn, investigative journalist, cynical, relentless. She'd been fired from 3 major publications for pushing too hard on corporate corruption. I had known her years ago when she embedded with my unit overseas. We hadn't spoken since, but when I called and gave her 2 words project erased, she agreed to meet. She didn't ask where. She just said, "Bring receipts." And I had them. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to break the story that would shift the power dynamic of my entire bloodline. Because erasing me wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Harper met me at a coffee shop in Old Town, neutral territory, bright windows, public but not loud. She walked in wearing dark jeans aviators and a trench coat that said, "I'm watching you," even when she smiled. We didn't hug. We never had that kind of friendship. She slid into the booth across from me and pulled out a recorder without asking. "Project erased," she said. "You've got 5 minutes to convince me this isn't a YouTube rabbit hole." I reached into my bag and handed her a copy of the death declaration filed in my name. Her eyebrows rose, but she didn't speak. I followed with bank log screenshots of my VA portal access errors, social security letters, and the DMV rejection slip. Then I gave her the biometric summary from the Whitmore Reserve, the only document in existence that could link me to something bigger than Graham's paper shredder. Harper tapped the recorder once. "Who filed this?" "My father," I said. She exhaled sharply. "I always knew the Whitmores were cold, but this is surgical." I nodded. "He didn't just want me out of the family. He wanted me out of the system." Harper flipped through the folder in silence. "And what do you want from me?" "Evidence. Public exposure. I don't just want to get back into the system. I want to show people how easy it is to be deleted when someone with enough money decides you're inconvenient." She sat back, crossed her arms. "You're not just trying to fix this. You're trying to burn the old blueprint." I met her eyes. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for restoration. But yes, if I have to burn the rot to clear the ground, I will." She smiled. "Then let's light the match." Over the next week, Harper started pulling threads, quietly. She traced the death certificate back to a private physician paid under a shell account. The name, A Fake. The license expired. The address, a dry cleaner in Dallas. She subpoenaed corporate filings under Whitmore Holdings and found newly added board members, shell investors with links to offshore accounts in Belize. At the same time, I reached out to Damien Voss, a forensic analyst Edwin had once trusted. He examined the documents my father had used to claim my death. The military file had been forged using an old scan of my deployment record. But the timestamp metadata didn't match. It had been created months after Edwin died. Damien stared at the screen, then said flatly, "This wasn't sloppy. This was professional. Your father paid someone who knew what they were doing." I nodded, but he didn't expect me to come back from the grave. Damien printed the report. "When you're ready to go public, this is what you lead with. It proves malice. It proves manipulation." I had 2 weapons now, Harper's media muscle and Damien's forensic truth. All I needed was timing. That came 2 days later, when Whitmore Holdings announced its new family initiative, the Lydia Legacy Fund, a public trust designed to empower disenfranchised female entrepreneurs. The irony nearly made me laugh. They were building a brand off my erasure, a PR campaign off a corpse that wasn't even cold because she wasn't even dead. Harper made the call. She pitched the story to 3 outlets. Only one took the risk: a small but fiercely independent financial watchdog blog, known for exposing corporate fraud. We agreed to go live on Thursday at 9 a.m. sharp. The article dropped like a silent grenade. The woman her family tried to erase: a former soldier's battle for identity, inheritance, and justice. It was concise, brutal, and devastating. By 10 a.m., Whitmore Holdings stock dropped 4%. By noon, board members started scrambling to make statements. By nightfall, my father issued a press release calling it a gross misrepresentation fueled by a disgruntled former employee. Except I wasn't an employee. I was blood, and I had proof. At 6 p.m., Harper uploaded the video, a segment from Edwin's original USB message, edited only for clarity. It showed him naming me as the rightful steward of the Whitmore Reserve. The date was time-stamped, verified. Undeniable. I didn't say a word in the video, didn't appear, didn't need to. My silence was louder than any press conference. And as the screen faded to black, one sentence appeared: "You can erase a name. You can't erase the truth." I didn't sleep the night the video went live. Not because I was scared, but because I knew the silence was over. At 6:02 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. At 6:07, it rang again, then texts, then emails, all from people who hadn't said my name in years. Lydia was the first one to cave. She emailed Harper directly. "I don't know what's happening. I had nothing to do with any of this, I swear." She wasn't lying exactly. Lydia never pulled the strings. She just smiled while others did. But the walls were cracking now, and cracks always expose the steel or the rot beneath. By noon, multiple journalists were requesting interviews. Harper declined them all. No comment, she told them. She's not after fame. She's after correction. But the truth didn't need commentary. It had already unspooled. The video of Edwin naming me as the steward of the reserve had gone viral within niche financial circles. Reddit threads, anonymous investment forums, whispers inside the legal community. Everyone was asking the same question. How much was this private reserve really worth? The answer wasn't clear, and that was part of the genius, because no one could trace the value, not through banks, not through ledgers, only through trust. And Edwin had put that trust in one person, me. By 3 p.m., I received an encrypted message through the backup channel in the protocol folder. 2 vaults, one in Nevada, one in upstate New York, had confirmed physical access logs. The documents had been untouched for decades. Now suddenly someone was trying to retrieve them. That someone wasn't me. It was Graham. He was trying to backdoor his way into the system Edwin built. But he didn't know the security layers. Didn't know that without the biometric key, the vaults didn't just deny access, they sent silent alerts. And now I had those alerts, time-stamped, logged, legally admissible. I forwarded them to Miriam Hollis. She responded within minutes. "Claire, we have enough now. More than enough. The attempts to override your legal identity, the false documentation, the video evidence, the unauthorized vault access. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is federal." I wasn't surprised, but I was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep solves, the kind of tired that comes from years of being unseen, unheard, erased. But that was changing. Damien Voss submitted a full forensic report to the state's attorney. A sealed complaint was filed. Harper's article was picked up by a national outlet. And suddenly this wasn't just about the Whitmores. It was about every daughter left out of every room. Every soldier erased when they were no longer useful. Every voice that had been muted by money. I didn't make a statement, didn't go on television, didn't post. All I did was one quiet thing. I walked into Vault 2, entered the secondary code from Miriam, and withdrew 3 documents. They were titled Equity Redistribution Directive Legacy Infrastructure Realignment Asset Recovery Shield. Each one had a place to sign. I didn't hesitate. I signed them all. In doing so, I triggered the final phase of Edwin's plan, the redirection of all reserve funds into a newly formed structure, a foundation with no Whitmore name, no branding, just a mission. A private autonomous trust focused on rebuilding what greed had destroyed. I wasn't the face of it. I didn't need to be. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is not stand at the podium, but build the podium and leave it empty, so that others can finally speak. It was the kind of trial that didn't make national headlines, but everyone in the room knew it should have. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about what happens when power is inherited instead of earned. When silence is weaponized, when truth has to fight its way into the light. The courtroom was small, civil, professional, no camera crews, just quiet tension echoing off polished wood and stone. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Miriam Hollis. She wore her courtroom black, no jewelry, no smile, only focus. Her hands were still as stone. Across from us sat my father, Graham Whitmore. Tailored suit, clean shave, calm expression. The same look he wore when burning a $38 million check in front of me. Except this time he didn't have the upper hand. Lydia wasn't beside him. She had filed for separation from the family trust 3 days prior and submitted a sealed affidavit, admitting she had no knowledge of Claire's erasure and did not participate in or authorize any related actions. She hadn't apologized, but she had chosen survival, which in the Whitmore family was the closest thing to a confession. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Honorable Rosemary Keats, had seen enough wealthy power struggles to know when someone was bluffing. She watched my father the way a hawk studies a slow-moving rabbit. The prosecution laid it all out: the forged military documentation, the manipulated death filing, the attempted unauthorized access to vaults, the years of silence designed to destroy a legal identity without drawing attention. Then came Damien's forensic testimony. He spoke calmly, clearly, breaking down timestamps, metadata, and encryption logic so simple, even the jury could see how calculated it had all been. "There is no way this filing was accidental," he said. The defendant used his resources and legal contacts to fabricate a federal death notice, and he used it to remove her access to everything from her bank accounts to her very name. Then Miriam rose. She laid down the biometric scan logs, the final directive from Edwin, the legal legitimacy of the Whitmore Reserve transfer. And the protocol triggers, Claire had completed every one of them, falling perfectly within the wishes of the original founder. Then she asked the question that hung in the room like smoke. Why would a woman fake her own death and spend years in obscurity, only to reclaim an identity she supposedly never had? No one answered. Not because they didn't know, but because the truth was self-evident. I didn't take the stand. I didn't need to. Because the evidence spoke louder than blood, louder than last names, louder than old money. Graham's team tried to stall delay reframe. They claimed it was a clerical mistake, a misunderstanding, a tragedy of miscommunication. But they couldn't explain why the vaults had been accessed, why the biometric data matched only me, why the man who built the empire chose me in private even after disinheriting me in public. The verdict came on a Tuesday. The courtroom was silent as Judge Keats read it aloud. This court finds sufficient evidence of identity erasure, financial manipulation, and deliberate obstruction of generational succession. Control of the Whitmore Reserve and any affiliated legacy entities is hereby awarded to Ms. Claire Ann Whitmore. There was no gasp, no breakdown, not even a whisper, just the echo of a gavel, and the quiet feeling of justice returning to a name that had been taken. Outside the courthouse, Harper was waiting. She didn't record. She just nodded. "You want to say anything?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, this part isn't about me anymore." And I meant it. Because what I had recovered wasn't just a fortune, it was my right to exist, to be heard, to be remembered. I didn't walk out of that courtroom a billionaire. I walked out a free woman. Not free in the patriotic sense, not free in the legal sense, but free in the oldest way possible. No one owned my name anymore, and no one ever would again. The courtroom victory didn't feel like a finish line. It felt like a threshold, one I hadn't been allowed to cross in years. And now that I had, I didn't want revenge. I wanted reconstruction. Not of the Whitmore name. That legacy could stay buried with its gold trim and cold dinners. I wanted to build something better, something clean, something that couldn't be taken away with a forged document or a boardroom whisper. The Whitmore Reserve still existed untouched, intact, but it wouldn't be used to prop up family names or fund glass towers in cities no one could afford to live in. Instead, I redirected the reserve. I filed the final paperwork through Miriam and Damien, transferring ownership of the core trust to a new foundation. I named quietly the 46th room. It was a nod to Vault 46, one of the original safe rooms where Edwin had hidden part of the reserve's physical assets. But more than that, it was a statement: there's always one more door. One more room they didn't expect you to find. One more chance they didn't know you had. The foundation didn't announce itself. No launch parties, no press releases, no plaques. Just action. The 46th Room began working through silent grants targeting women veterans survivors of financial abuse, people whose names had been lost in the system. No branding, no family emblems, just clean wires and clean chances. Harper published a follow-up 6 months later. She didn't name me. She titled it simply, "What Happens When the Erased Rebuild?" The article didn't trend, but it traveled quietly, steadily like truth often does. Law students studied the case. Policy advocates quoted the transcript in reform hearings. A nonprofit in Arizona copied the 46th Room model to create their own reentry program. And just like that, a story that began with silence began to echo. As for Graham, he lost his seat on the board, retreated to private holdings. No jail time, no public disgrace. But power isn't always about headlines. Sometimes it's about doors that stay closed no matter how hard someone knocks. And every door that opened to me now, he would never touch. Lydia sent me a card, no letter inside, just a photo of us when we were kids before lines were drawn, before names were currency. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away either. Forgiveness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the decision to not pass the damage forward. I kept one thing from the reserve, a single gold coin dated 1922. It had been placed inside the original vault as a test token. Edwin once told me that coin outlived kings and systems. If it's still here when you find it, remember survival is just step one. What you do with it next is legacy. I keep it in my coat pocket, not because it's valuable, but because it reminds me they burned the check, they erased the name, they closed every door they could. But I'm still here, and the room they never saw coming is open. 3 weeks after the court ruling, I received a package. No return address. Hand-delivered by courier. Inside was a small black notebook bound in cracked leather. No title, no instructions. I opened it. Page 1. His handwriting. If you're reading this, you already know. But I want you to hear it from me anyway. This was never about money, Claire. It was about proving that legacy isn't a throne, it's a light. And some people are afraid of what you'll see when you turn it on. The pages weren't financial records. They were reflections, letters, memories, plans, things he never shared publicly because no one would have understood. In one entry he wrote, "They thought the reserve was a vault. It wasn't. It was a test, not of loyalty, a vision. I needed someone who saw beyond the balance sheet, someone who didn't ask, 'What's in it for me?' But instead, 'Who else can this save?' You were the only one who never asked me for anything. That's why I gave you everything." I flipped to the back where a folded slip of paper had been tucked between 2 pages. It was a photo, black and white, of him and me on the rooftop garden when I was 8, holding a telescope and a notebook, laughing. Scrawled on the back in faded ink, "You always looked up." That's how I knew. That was the final twist. It had never been about the money, or the reserve, or even the name. It was about trust, passed quietly, earned over time, not inherited, not demanded, but seen, chosen, guarded. And now it was mine to give forward, or protect, or close. But whatever I chose, it would never again be controlled by people who mistook silence for weakness. It would belong to those who had once been erased and were now finally being written back in. 2 months later, I stood once again before Judge Rosemary Keats. This time the courtroom was nearly empty. No press, no family, no battles left to fight. Just a simple motion on the docket. Motion to reinstate legal identity. Claire Ann Whitmore. I stood while Miriam spoke. She outlined the events clearly, cleanly. No drama, no extra weight. Just truth. Your Honor. She said my client was declared deceased through fraudulent means and subsequently erased from all legal, financial, and governmental systems. All evidence supports that Ms. Whitmore is factually, biologically, and lawfully alive, and has always been. Judge Keats didn't interrupt, didn't frown, didn't even blink. She turned to me. Ms. Whitmore, is there anything you'd like to say before I make my ruling? I hesitated, then nodded. I don't want sympathy. I don't need restoration to feel real again. But I do want this court to recognize something. That erasure, real erasure, isn't just paperwork. It's the kind of silence that eats through everything. She nodded slowly, understood more than she said. Then she reached for her pen. In accordance with submitted documentation, biometric evidence, and legal testimony, this court grants full reinstatement of identity for Ms. Claire Ann Whitmore. The gavel struck once, a quiet sound, but it rang louder than anything I'd heard in years. I walked out, not with celebration, but with something deeper, certainty. My name was mine again, my past restored, and my future now unclaimed by anyone but me. I didn't throw a party. No champagne. No press conference. I walked home through the quiet part of town, past the old bakery that still hadn't reopened, and the bench where Grandpa once waited for me after piano lessons. The leaves had begun to turn burnt orange yellow, the color of endings. But I wasn't ending anything. I was beginning. The foundation space was nearly finished. Painted walls, refurbished floors, desks arranged in a circle so no one sat at the head. That mattered to me. I pinned Grandpa's final note above the door. Make something they can't erase. And I did. Not for revenge, not to prove them wrong, but because I finally believed I could build something right. Each morning I walked past the plaque on the wall, Whitmore Foundation for Women Veterans. It was just a name, but this time it was mine. Tori came by to help register new clients. A woman named Denise dropped off a box of donated coats. Dean was coordinating our first job fair. We weren't loud. We weren't flashy, but we were visible and unerasable. Some days I still woke up expecting to disappear again, expecting someone to knock and say, "Sorry, this was all a mistake." But no one ever came. And little by little, the fear became background noise, like an old injury that doesn't hurt anymore, just reminds you where you've been. One afternoon, I stood outside the building, watching people go in and out. No one knew what it had cost. No one asked. And that felt right. Because some victories don't look like trophies. They look like keys, like doors that open easily because you refuse to let them stay locked. I was no longer missing, no longer erased, no longer waiting for someone else to hand me back my life. I had written it myself. And now I was living in the footnotes, the part no one ever gets to take from you. Just like Grandpa said, it takes more than fire to stop royalty.